Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 113, a very special episode. This is part of our Batman month, or Bat March, I suppose as we're calling it, hashtag Bat March. Before we get started, a quick shout out and thank you to one of our brand new patrons, Devin. Thank you so much, brand new mayor level patron. You can go to patreon.com/Capes on the Couch and subscribe and unlock some additional content and get a cool shout out like Devin did. We're going to dive right into it. This, as part of our Batman month, is a roundtable discussion with a couple of fabulous and fantastic guests. First off, our good friend coming back on the show, Ben Stover from Popcorn Psychology. Ben, thanks for taking the time to join us once again.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the invite.
And I knew you weren't going to miss an opportunity to talk about Batman. And,
not a single one.
Not a single one. Goodness knows you don't do it enough on your own show.
Oh, not even close to enough.
And you don't have Hannah or Brittany here to stop you. And our very, very special guest this episode, a big get for us, a man who's a preeminent expert in the field of comic book and superhero psychiatry and psychology, Dr. Travis Langley. Dr. Langley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this episode.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
Dr. Langley has literally written the book on Batman and literally called Batman and Psychology. Plug it. We'll add a link in the show notes.
Pretty.
It is. It's a beautiful cover. As I was telling Dr. Langley before we got started, I made it my way through about 80% of the book. Unfortunately, having a 2-year-old at home kind of cuts into reading time of anything that isn't Dr. Seuss. And I know Ben can certainly understand that.
Right.
Oh, yes. Clifford in our house. Fortunately, I was able to read my copy before the little one arrived. And that book is directly responsible for our podcast existing in the first place. So I am, very thrilled to be talking with Dr. Langley once again.
Yeah. I was going to say,
Ben has done convention panels with me. Yeah, it was Chicago, wasn't it?
Yes, Chicago in 2018 at Wizard World.
And eventually that will happen again. Wizards planning real hard. They're trying to have Chicago Comic-Con. That's their big target, to resume, hopefully, conventions with Chicago in August.
Really? They're gonna try for in-person C2E2?
That's what they're
no, that's right.
C2E2 is Reed Pop.
Reed. Right. I stand corrected.
That's Reed. But Wizard World has Wizard World Chicago Comic-Con, which the Chicago Comic-Con is in Rosemont, near Chicago. It's scheduled for August, and that is the plan. Even though there have been some things that had to stay on the schedule until they could finally get the okay to, get their refund on the convention center or make other arrangements, they're really wanting to have live Chicago Comic-Con in August. So that's what they're shooting for. There are a bunch of them, like San Diego. They're very seriously trying to plan for a live convention in July.
Well, God bless them if they can make it happen. I'm certainly not holding my breath. I'm not even really sure that if they have New York in October, that I would be comfortable going to that. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
I'm fortunate enough to be vaccinated now, so I'm hoping that we can get enough people to follow suit that we can have a world open up again. But
yeah, I'm with you, brother.
You only allow, if you require a mask and proof of vaccination, that helps right there for the whole event.
Yep,
sure
helps.
Does.
Yep, my most of my in-laws are vaccinated. I myself am not yet. My wife is vaccinated, so I'm hoping that I can get my shot soon. But enough about the shots, and let's talk about a character who knows a thing or two about people getting shot, and that's Batman. It's a bit of a bad pun, but
all right, we're starting on that note.
We're starting on that note. Yeah.
Oh boy,
John's normally the one who makes the bad puns on our show.
That's where it all begins.
Yes. That's
so. The first question that I want to ask is, what are your first memories of Batman? And I guess we'll start with Ben. Obviously, Ben, you're a diehard fan. You and I are of a similar age range. So what's your earliest memory of Batman?
I think my earliest memory of Batman is when the old Adam West show would come on Nick at Night. I'm pretty sure that's when I first encountered Batman, because we'd run around as kids singing that theme song. It was so very to sing that song and want to run around Batman. And but I think my real love for the character evolved once the animated series kicked in, because that was so good. I just love it so much. I'm wearing my Joker shirt today. I don't know if everybody can see. It says "Make Gotham Great Again." Batman.
Oh man!
Wow, love it. But yeah, I think that would be my start of it. Is the old Adam West show, and then the complete tone switch to the animated series.
Oh man, that's amazing. Mainly because I don't have anything to add. That's actually exactly my first experience as well. I had no idea what the idea of syndication was, so I did not really have a concept of time. I thought that was like the ongoing show with Batman, that original. And then the animated series came. I said, "Oh, this is a much different take." And I realized that even as a cartoon, there's a serious tone to it. That really helped me a lot in terms of understanding the maturity of characters between that and my experience with Superman, which I won't get into. But yeah, pretty much the same.
Dr. Langley, what about you? What are your first solid memories?
When I discovered the sun, he was always there. We've got no. My baby book shows that one of my earliest words was Batman. Actually, it's in there twice, in the baby book twice. And I once figured out, okay, I figured out the date. Okay, that would have been the month the Adam West show first came on the air. I'm giving my age away here. But my mom says I liked the comic books before the show. Well, that doesn't sound realistic with a toddler, but we've got a photo of me at 9 months holding one of her comic books, just looking delighted with it. So, I mean, Batman for me has always been there. Yes, there's the Adam West show, and he was my childhood hero, and it is so cool that I got to know him as a person. But there were cartoons, there were those comic books, and then one of the things that motivated me to learn to read was so that I could read the comic books myself instead of having to pester my mom to read them again. Although once I was old enough to buy my own and really read them, those stories were so much darker than I expected. You look at what Denny O'Neil and Bob Haney were writing, illustrated by Neil Adams and Jim Aparo, and the Joker's murdering people. My first Joker story was the second one in which he was killing people again.
Oh, so after they decided to stop nerfing him from the
Danny O'Neil did that. Yeah, Danny O'Neil did that because Batman had almost ended as some backlash from the TV show, and they wanted to get the stories more serious. And after the Joker having appeared practically every month in one comic book or another for many years, for 4 years he didn't appear in a single Batman story until Denny brought him back in '73 as a killer and treating him as insane. And Neil Adams, he didn't want to. He was skeptical of making the Joker a killer. So that he had been so entrenched in the lighter stories of many years, which is hard to think with Neil's style of art, but I can ramble with Batman history for the hour.
Well, I'd have to say no one has brought up, at least between Doc and Ben, which is my first real exposure to Batman, and that was the Michael Keaton film. I was 7 when that came out, and I have very distinct memories of buying, or not me personally buying, but my parents buying for me, pretty much all the Batman stuff, because I was the prime age, 7 years old, for all of the merchandise. So I had the Batman doll, I had the shirt, I had the Batmobile, I had the action figures. I still, in my parents' attic, have the complete set, series 1 and 2 of the Topps trading cards for the movie. The boxes have been opened so I could look at the cards, but the cards are otherwise in mint condition. So at some point, maybe when my son gets a little older, they'll end up on eBay or something. So that's my first memorable experience with Batman. And then obviously, to add on to everybody else, the animated series, to the point that I think I speak for about 90% of my generation when I say that when I read a Batman comic, it is in Kevin Conroy's voice in my head.
Every time.
Every time.
Kevin Conroy is Batman in my head.
Yeah.
Nothing against Diedrich Bader, who I think did a fantastic job, Batman, the Brave and the Bold, but Kevin Conroy is Batman. He is Bruce Wayne. There's no two ways about it. So now that we got the starting points out of the way, the first question that I want to ask, and I'll throw this open to anybody, what is it that makes Batman such a compelling character? He's been in comics for over 80 years at this point, and the stories have run the gamut from the serious to the silly to everything in between. And yet, as an icon, he has managed to endure. And I know that Dr. Langley obviously wrote the book, Batman in Psychology, about a lot of this. But I just sort of want to throw this out there in general. What is it about the idea of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman that resonates with people across generations, across decades, what all race, gender, socioeconomic status? Why Batman?
Ben, you start. I've answered this one so many times I can pretty much recite my own book, but I will answer it. Ben, you go first.
You got it. All right. So I think for what makes sense to me with Batman is a perfect example of the mythic hero. We watch him endure a normal life. We see everything taken from him. And then we watch him have to rise up through the struggles of all of that, to grapple with himself, to grapple with redefining his identity and finding a way to take his own strength back and try to find a place in the world that makes sense to him, given his new truth and way of seeing the world that is different than what other people have done or the general population encounter. To him, like Luke Skywalker or any of our other classic heroes, follows the same pattern. So I think fitting a compelling character with wonderful artwork and backstory just ties him right into another example of a perfect mythic hero.
Yeah. There's perfection and imperfection. That's a little esoteric on my part, but just the idea that you have a human being that ends up having tragic situations befall him at an age that he had no agency and no control, to then develop everything, although had certain means that we all recognize, but still able to take everything from a intellectual standpoint, a physical standpoint, an emotional standpoint, be able to refocus all of that into something that people came to respect, villains came to fear, and just doing it, to take Frank Sinatra's line, to do it his way, to be able to have that level of control over a person's life. That's something that we all aspire for. We want to make sure that even when things are adverse, that we are still in some level of control. And when things don't go our way, we have some way of managing it and still coming out on top. So I know I'm not saying much different than what anybody else is saying, but that's always been my thought of it. An example of that is basically, the old story of Batman War on Crime. The idea that, yes, you can't solve everything. And yes, there are going to be times where you're going to be put in untenable circumstances, and to still do that and still recognize that everything you're doing is worth it. Even if it's not seen by everyone else, you know for a fact that what you're doing is worth it. That motivation, that just continued excellence, that is really what has always drawn the character for me.
Yeah, he's the superhero with no superpowers. He is defined by his psychology. The other superheroes, you start describing them, you start with their powers. Aurora has power over weather. Cyclops has beams come out of his eyes. You repeatedly start with defining those characters. But I mean, he's not the only one who doesn't have superpowers, but he's one who really stands out. He pulled together a bunch of things at a very particular time. He had to pull together things that had worked for the Shadow and Zorro. They were deliberately pulling for those, and the Bat Whispers, and not the earlier the Bat, but the Bat Whispers, which have taken from the Bat. Bob Kane and Bill Finger pulled these elements together in a way nobody else had in the comics. And then Bill Finger adds all these other twists, and everybody in this room knows most of what defined Batman at the beginning came from Bill Finger. But Bill decided he wanted a detective, so he's smart, but realistically smart, not superhuman alien level 5 genius. He is the peak of things that people are. One person can't be the peak of everything, but there's still a sense of this is somebody who could exist. There is something realistic about this guy who does unrealistic things, but there is a reality to it. It feels like it could be real, even though it's impossible for one guy to have 1,000 adventures. Those 1,000 adventures in between don't matter. What matters is these adventures that he's in right now, and the one that started at the origin story, and it is tragically human origin story. We all know we can or will or have, in terms of losing parents. That is tapping into one of the most primal fears there is. And because these days, dead parents are in origin stories all over the place. Tragedy is in them all over the place, but people are repeatedly trying to capture Batman or insert some Batman into backgrounds. Flash, he had his parents. He was one of the few superheroes who got to send cards on both Father's Day and Mother's Day. He got to have his parents as an active part of his life. And so it's actually relatively recent. It's just 2011 that Mom got murdered, and this is not Green Lantern. He saw his father die in a plane explosion. These are things that got inserted into the history because of people trying to capture some of that Batman magic that had been there way back when. It's not necessarily that you want to be Batman, but you want to think somebody could be Batman. When you're in the wrong part, when you've wandered into the wrong part of the town, you're in the darkness, and no bright, beaming, godlike figure is going to fly out of there to save you. You're hoping maybe somebody who is in the darkness can step up and stand up for you.
Very well said by all three of you. And I think it really speaks to, like I said, the fantastic job that Bob and Bill did in the beginning to set all of that up. I've read a lot of the early Batman that I know Dr. Langley referenced this in your book, the fact that the whole dead parents thing wasn't part of the original story. Like, it was added on a short time later so that we consider it part of
it. Was 6 months.
Yeah, we consider that part of the origin story, but it wasn't in that initial Detective Comics story. And so that leads into the next question. And I thought there was some really interesting stuff in your book, Dr. Langley, regarding the trauma that he underwent and whether or not Bruce is actually diagnosed or can be diagnosed with PTSD. And you argue that he does not, in fact, exhibit the full range of symptoms sufficient to classify him with post-traumatic stress disorder.
In most
stories, yes. Obviously, certain creators take liberty with certain Elseworld stories and depending on who's writing the book. But how realistic is his response to the trauma? And again, I'll open this up to everybody. The idea that he sees his parents gunned down in front of him and he decides, you know what, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to stopping this from ever happening again. And then I'm going to dress up like a bat and do all of these other things. How realistic is the response to the trauma?
So I guess I'll start again here since I started the last one. I actively treat trauma every day. I am a trauma therapist. I hold certifications in EMDR, certified clinical trauma professional, and I work for the police. I work actively with people who have both been shot, had to shoot, have been in all sorts of violations. And with Batman, I think Dr. Langley's point, excellent. I pull from it. It depends on which version of the story we're seeing. Watching my Batman movies this past week to prepare for this, and watching and then some, it gets graphically represented in interesting ways that might be close to what people experience, but is a little embellished. I think that constant trigger and the constant guilt and the constant images of the pearls falling and being in dark alleys and constantly replaying that, I think that's very real. I think that Batman being triggered by guilt that keeps him wondering was responsible, recognize that it happened and it was terrible to him, and defines his existence. So the themes of trauma that they pull into Batman are pretty accurate.
Yeah, the persistent reliving.
Get embellished.
The repeatedly reliving that is one of the PTSD symptoms that he has the strongest. He relives it frequently. And for some individuals, and of course, we don't see every minute of his life. We don't really see when he's sitting around at lunch. He's probably not sitting around eating a hamburger thinking, but boy, this hamburger would taste better if nobody had gunned down my parents. So, but in the kinds of stories we see him in, he is around reminders of what happened. This is one of the PTSD symptoms he does not have. He does not avoid reminders of the crime. He seeks them out. Kind of a counterphobic behavior, but it's not just phobic. This is one of the things he does for managing his feelings, is immersing himself. Like that scene in Batman Begins. You've got where the kid's afraid of bats. And he goes down in there. And man, I love the part where he pauses right before the rocks are kind of like giant teeth. And he goes down there anyway. He's surrounded by the bats and drops to his knees. But then he stands up and stands there in kind of a form of immersion therapy or flooding, done amateurishly. But he's going to be standing there with his heart pounding a mile a minute, but he's standing there to immerse himself in the thing that he's afraid of. But he definitely has some PTSD symptoms. And the idea that you can wage war on all crime, well, an 8-year-old has thoughts like that. Danny writes them as 8. Frank Miller wrote them as 6. Jeff Loeb wrote them as 10. That range right there. Okay, kids do have thoughts like that. Kids do have their bedtime prayer. Dear God, please help me wage war on all crime. It's although the way he worded it may have been a little mature. On film, he's usually shown a little older because it looks better. Those ages are ones where it's a little harder to think of the kid having this unrealistic idea that he can take on all of that. And as other characters, such Catwoman has said this to him several times in comics like by Tom King, that you're still that kid. So there is part of him that is still that kid. When we get into this dichotomy of his is who's the real person, Batman or Bruce Wayne? Well, to me, it's a false dichotomy. They are the same person. There is a Batman act, not just the Bruce Wayne act, but there's also a Batman act where he acts like he's larger than life. He is a very human character. And he is the person who lost his parents in that alley. There are people who hang on to their pains. Some of what we call post-traumatic growth. People who hang on to their pain. They have certain PTSD symptoms, and they feel like it would be selfish to give them up because they use their pain to follow a cause, to find a purpose, and to grow. Elie Wiesel, who was in the Holocaust. He was in Nazi war camps, like Viktor Frankl, the psychologist. But Elie Wiesel, who for 10 years would not talk about what his family went through during the Holocaust, but began writing and educating the world, and won the Nobel Prize for his efforts in these areas. Candace Lightner, whose daughter got killed by a drunk driver, made her version of the Batman vow when she was so appalled by the light sentence that the driver got, that she would wage war on drunk driving, and founded what was originally called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. There are a number of these individuals who they show us like there are people who hang on to their pain in ways that seem unrealistic for other people, but they do, and they feel like it would be selfish to give their pain up, which I would fall a little more, but it relates to another topic you're going to bring up.
Yeah. In terms of, parts that for many people, depending on how they're experiencing trauma, the idea of dissociation is something that comes up in some of these stories, not with Batman directly dissociating or getting depersonalization or derealization, but many of the people, and I know I'm kind of taking a tangent here. For example, the Scarecrow, when he uses his fear toxins, when, he's dealing with someone like the Mad Hatter with these alternate realities, all these different things. Usually the way Batman ends up being portrayed is, in this super chaotic area. And he's the one that's trying to maintain for himself a certain sense of order. When you add that in, it reminds me of some people that when they're trying to process these types of events, we're getting to learn more about psychedelics and using them in therapy, things like that. And comics, I feel like, is actually ahead of the curve with this because they brought up the idea of how things can be brought in from the outside, even if a person hasn't had that experience before. Batman basically is saying, I know it all, I've seen it all, not because I'm an expert in any of this, but because if you haven't tried to deal with the things that have happened to you at a certain age, it's not going to happen for you unless someone else makes it happen. And so he's had to confront that time and time and time again. And there's no question, as you already said, that you're going to get growth from that. Some of the other things, like he doesn't have PTSD, I think, also because for many people that experience, for example, the hypervigilance, I wouldn't call him hypervigilant. He's vigilant. It's what he does. He's on patrol. He knows that that's what he has to do. So it's actually very effective for him. And I think actually helps him stay grounded. So it doesn't produce like an adverse emotional response. It's an appropriate emotional response. So, I think that's the part where he kind of leans into it.
I would agree. I don't think that we see him ever not quite meet the criteria of having PTSD. What I think that is an important differentiation, and I make this with clients all the time, like there is a difference between having experienced trauma and having post-traumatic stress disorder, and having had experienced trauma but not rising to the level of PTSD does not invalidate the fact that you experience trauma that can change the way you think and feel about the world and yourself.
Yes,
that does not make it any less bad.
That is such a strong point you just made, Ben, because people get this mixed up. Well, of course, how could this person not have PTSD? Well, because maybe they don't. We don't completely understand resilience. We know some things that build it up, but it's almost circular in its definition. It's like resilience means the ability to overcome or resist problems and difficulties and things that can make us weak. Then okay, but what is it? Where does it come from? We don't completely know. But not everybody is going to be affected the same way. Kids don't have it nearly as severely, as often as adults, because life is traumatic to kids. It's chaos all the time. They're constantly learning and changing. It's when we get older that we're going to be even more traumatized by the things that go on. But he had the most traumatic thing in the world go on. Fortunately, there is enough of a body of information about children, not only children whose parents have been killed by others, but children who've witnessed it. There is a body of information about these kids, and yes, some of them are tremendously traumatized about it. Some of them aren't nearly as affected by it as you would expect, but it depends on many different things.
It's sad that we can say that there is enough of a body of information of children who have witnessed their parents being murdered, but that's a whole other topic for someone else.
That right there is why I get to do the things I do. When I teach my forensic psychology class, some of those topics are so unpleasant that people can miss the point that I'm making about real human nature. I can take that same stuff we know about real people and talk about them through an example like Batman, and people stay with me. That filter of fiction helps them stay with that.
That's the purpose of our show, and that's also the purpose of Ben's show to an extent, is to take pop culture and use it, that filter, as you said, filter of fiction, to destigmatize some of these discussions around mental health. Nobody wants to think that the things that they've gone through makes them broken, or that they have some sort of a disorder or things like that. But if they read the comics, or they see a movie and they say, this character is going through something very similar that I went through, and how did they cope with it? Maybe there's something they can glean from that makes them say, okay, if they went through this, even though it's a movie or a TV show or a comic book, that I can somehow take a lesson from that. And that's some of the things that, like I said, Doc and I talk about every week on our show is using fictional characters to talk about very real topics and ways that our listeners and real live individuals can learn a lesson from it. There's myriad lessons that people can learn from Batman, one of which is don't wear a pearl necklace when you're walking down Crime Alley. I had to throw a joke in there somewhere.
This is what he does. This is what I deal with every week.
Every week, every Wednesday.
Doc, do you just have like a handprint, like just permanently on the center of your forehead from the number of times
he gives is just as good as he gets.
Yeah, I don't want to kid ourselves. I was going to say, I don't want to pretend that I'm totally innocent in this.
So moving on then to the next topic is one of the key defining features about Batman that is certainly not unique to him as a character, but I think he's potentially more well known for this than most other superheroes, is the family, the Bat family, the cadre of characters that he surrounds himself with, whether it's the recurring Robins, of which there are many, Commissioner Gordon, to Batgirl, to Alfred, to the whole host of people that he aligns himself with. And then also the mentors that he himself has and his colleagues in the Justice League and things of that nature. We just spoke last week on an episode all about the relationships that Batman has with a number of different characters. The family dynamics of the Bat family are incredibly interesting. And I think that's a blanket term because depending on the character that you're talking about, it can range from chummy to just wrong. But what is it about the family dynamics that has such an impact on Bruce? And why do we, as readers and as fans of Batman, feel so drawn into the Bat family?
I think the beauty of the Bat family is that so many different aspects of relationships and disorders and life challenges all get addressed, and that they find such creative ways that so many of us can identify with and get in touch with. We've all had someone we've been responsible for be reckless, and the fear that we feel in that, and then the hardening to it, and then trying to teach someone a lesson and them not listening, that we see with Batman and the various different aspects of Robin. Seeing Batman try to have the complicated relationships when we start factoring Damian Wayne into this situation, and the relationships between him and Catwoman, this person that he just is so attracted to and has this deep love for, but she just won't be good. And he has to have good, and seeing like the ways that we can identify with the struggles we've had with people in our own lives, that we can see either mirror in that character or aspects of it to face the struggles in our mind and try to process different ways to move through those events or to find new ways to try to solve the problems, I think is what drives readers to be so compelled by characters, especially like Batman, Airman, and then some in the X-Men, where we see all of these more complicated family dynamics start to evolve. And even I guess in the Avengers, especially when we reach the Civil War era, like seeing characters that have all of these dynamics at play, I think is very representative of the challenges we face with different people in our life. And I think that Batman's Bat family does that in wonderful ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you say, okay, here you are as a surrogate, parents for this child, and they follow in your footsteps, and you end up with someone like Nightwing, and then you end up with someone that unfortunately has a horrible experience under the same circumstances, and then is incredibly bitter about it, and you end up with Jason Todd, and then you end up with someone that seems to go kind of on their own, and you didn't even know you had a child, and all of a sudden you get Damian, and then you get all these other situations of, well, wait, maybe I should settle down with someone. Well, who is that? Was it Talia? Oh boy, that's interesting. And, you already mentioned Catwoman. The idea that at some point you want the quote unquote, and I'm oh boy, heavily using quotes here, the nuclear family, whatever that is, and at times trying to recreate that to no avail. The idea that fully well that the reason that you're still around is because you had someone like Alfred that's been the stalwart for so long. All of it coming together and knowing that at any given time, you're not going to have all of the pieces there. And there's no such thing as like this perfect setup. I like to think of, certain kids' TV shows where you're going to have all 5 characters of the team all there at once and they're all going to get their little fill. It doesn't work that way. People in life in general, you're going to have people that are on stage at certain points and people that are going to be in the background, and it's going to constantly shift. Those dynamics don't stay the same. And so when you have that with one person being the lens that we all get to view this from, then I think that makes it, really, really interesting, because that's how we view life. We can't view life from other people's lenses. It has to be our own. And Batman and Bruce and both of those capacities really allows us, to do that with kind of a non-judgmental filter. You could see a lot of, as Ben said, you could see a lot of other people in there. You get to see how other people tend to view it.
And in addition to all of that, I was trying to think, okay, they're saying so many things I want to talk about, but something else is that it says so much about Batman himself, having all these other, the original reason for giving him the sidekick, to have somebody to talk to, because Bill Finger was tired of writing the thought balloons. He needed somebody to interaction with, but it's not just it's not just that narrative function, the interaction. It changes who you are. You relate differently to one person, to somebody, as you do to somebody else. Bruce relates differently to Dick Grayson than he does to other kids, to other Robins, to extended Bat family, to his cousin who becomes Batwoman. So it brings out some other things in him. And he grew up without a family. He had parents that he loved early on, but Ever since the 80s, it's been that the butler kind of raised him, but it's more like Bruce Wayne raised himself. Before the 80s, it was an Uncle Philip that he lived with, but he didn't have a family life. He has very little living family, few living relatives in any version of the stories, and he's missed out all that. So he doesn't completely know how to have a family life. He doesn't completely know how to interact with these other people, especially the Robins as they get further and further away from the age that Bruce was when his parents died. The older they get, the less he has any clue what to do with them, which some of it's just storytelling. We need drama, we need friction. But as a person, it says he does not know how to deal with grown sons.
I remember somebody from one of our many chats, I don't remember if it was Twitter or Facebook or Discord, saying, what does it say about Batman that Dick is a better father to Damian than Bruce is? And I think that's just, there's so much in that dynamic there. And as I said, we've done episodes on all of the Robins with the exception of Stephanie Brown, because everybody forgets about Stephanie. And we just did Catwoman. When I say everyone, I never mean you, Dr. Langley. I promise you that. You're the exception to every rule when it comes to Batman fandom.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So shaking it up a little bit, we're going to go a little more fun character. Who's an unheralded Gotham character, an unheralded character in the Batman universe that doesn't always necessarily get the kudos that they deserve, doesn't get the credit that they deserve for either helping Bruce with his job or just keeping things running smoothly, or as smoothly as things can potentially go in Gotham. So I'm going to...
Brown.
Well, there you go.
That was always going to be my answer to this question, even before you just now brought her up. That's not me being facetious. I love the character of Stephanie Brown. She reflects some parts on Bruce himself where, I mean, she got a raw deal during her brief time as a Robin. But she is a wonderfully written character. Brian Q. Miller and Chuck Dixon particularly did just great things with that character. She fascinates me. The one whose origin is that it was adolescent rebellion against her criminal dad. That's why she became a crime fighter. I think that one is fantastic and it's different from the others. I think she needs to be much better known.
No argument here. And we always say that we haven't done Stephanie Brown not for lack of trying, but just because at this point we've got our patrons who pick our episodes, and Ariel, who is our resident Bat family expert, has not yet asked us to get to Stephanie, but I think we may have to just throw her in just as to spite Ariel for taking so long to getting around to her. Ben, what about you?
Oh, I was trying to think about this one because it's a complicated way to look at it, because there's some of the villains that I think could drive the story in ways like, God, maybe it drives me back to the animated series, but I love the Clock King. I think that the way they used him terrified me in ways that almost like Heath Ledger's Joker did, but he was more open about like being so precise and so planned. And even though Joker, I think, lied in my interpretation of it in my head, Heath Ledger's Joker just lied to everybody about being a dog chasing cars. He had every single plan laid out, plotted out. He was 10 to 12 steps ahead of everybody at all times. And I find that character fascinating and think that when I look at the characters that I think could be translated into real life, he strikes me as like a heist mastermind that could actually exist. I find myself wishing to see more of him in more of the media. It's like I was disappointed we didn't end up seeing him in the Arkham games, because I thought he would have fit into that universe in a fantastic and terrifying way. But I think for me, like Clock King was the one I was thinking of, but prior to some of the new media, I also would have said Alfred. Like the earlier versions of Alfred are presented by Michael Goff was wonderful, but then they represent him as the elder version of himself, as opposed to like my favorite version was the one from Sean Pertwee, and the way he played Alfred as being so present in Bruce's life. I know it's a younger version, but Alfred is really starting, and they're delving into his story. Former SAS is a fascinating twist. So Clock King and Alfred would have been my answers, depending on time period.
All right. So joke answer, calendar man. The real answer I'll give
And I know he's been in a lot of stories, but for some reason I always felt like he just didn't get his due for the amount of effort. If you look and read into his backstory, Hush, I really think that rather than just being the, I don't know what you want to call it, the Negaverse Batman, like this, just like this similar, but obviously different path kind of situation. I feel like there's always been something more there that just doesn't quite get explored. And I feel like it's kind of like, oh, we have a lull in who we can use. Oh, we can reintroduce Hush. Yeah, that works. We can do that for an arc. But I don't know. There's just something about him that he can be just as realistic in terms of what you can expect from someone with what they've gone through at an early age, and people could connect to it if it weren't just, all right, he's a Batman, but just not the same way and evil. Like, I don't know. That's a very brief, I have a way deeper thought of this, but that's my brief summary as to why I think he doesn't get nearly as much credit as he should.
Okay.
Well, which does the world have more of? Billionaire kids who grow up to do terrible things, or billionaire kids who grow up to devote their lives to making things nice for everybody?
Good point.
Yeah, I think Hush is a case of affluenza. My answer is Leslie Tompkins. I think she is somebody who is so integral to keeping things running. She is so much the grease in the background of the cogs and the wheels in Gotham that it's important that we give her a lot of credit to helping the people running the clinic. I know that she was a big part of the Catwoman series, or at least the one that we covered, Doc, not that long ago. But Leslie Tompkins played a role in that. She was a big part in No Man's Land. So there are just so many stories where you can insert Leslie Tompkins to have a role to play. She's never going to be the main feature, but I think any story where she plays an integral background role is a much more compelling story because of what she represents for the people of Gotham, as well as her relationship with Bruce and the Bat family. So she's someone that I would pick as like I said, an unsung hero of Gotham. So another fun question before we get back into some of the serious stuff is, should someone just kill the Joker and get it over with? I'm not saying it necessarily has to be Bruce, but can someone just do it and save Gotham and the world so much trouble? And if someone else were to kill the Joker, and I mean kill him, not in a comic book, he's dead, but we can't find his body kind of way. Like, no, he is dead, DED dead. Would that give Bruce some sort of peace, if such a thing is possible?
I don't think it would give Bruce peace. I think it would end maybe an obsession for him, but I don't think it would bring him peace. And I think some of the media's, the stories like we saw in Gotham even, I think what we would realistically see is that we would see enough copycats who, since the Joker had such massive success, like you come up to the argument of, can anyone replace the Joker? And then can anyone cause reasonable enough chaos to be problematic enough by emulating his tactics? I think we've seen over and over throughout history that even if dictators are deposed or the figurehead of movements is lost, it only works for so long before someone else follows exactly the same playbook, and we see this archetypes of evolve, and you can see it throughout history. So I don't know that killing the Joker would solve all that many problems. Certainly not permanently. I think we would just see fanatics pick up the mantle or try to emulate him or form their own version and their own flavor of the same problems. Maybe not quite as cleverly, but I think no.
It's interesting because what Ben just said actually has been shown time and time again within the medium. I mean, whether you're talking about, spinoffs like Batman Beyond and the Joker Gang, if you're talking about the movie itself, Joker, obviously it doesn't happen this way, but it pretty much points out that when people want to latch on to the idea of chaos or anarchy or just the idea of an unjust world and trying to have some agency in it, people are willing to go to those lengths. So to directly answer the question, should someone kill the Joker? Well, first of all, I mean, I can't help it. It's an ethics thing. I can't in any way condone that. I get the point, though. If there was some way to permanently eliminate the idea of a villain like that doing villainous things, in theory, that's what the justice system is for. But it's not going to fix, quote unquote, anything with with Batman or Bruce Wayne or anything like that. That's like saying because you remove a big rock, you've just eliminated the mount. That doesn't jive.
No, I think, and that's something that I've learned that I try to relay to clients, especially since working with the police and trauma in general, is evil exists. Evil has always existed. Evil will always exist. And removing one component of it, like Doc says, it's just removing a rock from a mountain. I don't see that. I think there's more negative that would come from that we would martyr him at minimum and then compromise your own ethics, which is its own complicated problem.
Anything to add, Dr. Langley?
Oh, so the question, should someone kill the Joker? Yes.
Someone had to do it. Someone had to say it. I was tempted to, but
What is funny though, normally when I'm in this topic with people, I'm the only one who says Bruce Wayne shouldn't do it. I went to Victoria, Canada, and we're having this session with me, the author of Becoming Batman, the editor of Batman and Philosophy, and we have this moderator, and they're all saying Batman should kill the Joker. And I get to, it's like, no, there's so many reasons why psychologically he shouldn't, personally he shouldn't. It is not his place in the system. We don't want an unlicensed, uncontrolled vigilante running around killing people. But I still agree. Yeah, some cops should take him out. But if you go, it's like, is there anybody they should ever shoot? Yes, shoot the Joker. There are plenty of times when you shouldn't do it. Like, you have him in custody already. That's not when you're supposed to do it. We want people to follow some rules, but Batman can't do it. They don't put a Punisher signal on the top of a police headquarters. I think it's very well done. It's a wonderful line in Under the Red Hood, and this was in the comics too, about how Batman struggles with that every day. That issue of he knows. He feels that he personally, if he makes that decision, he worries that he'll keep doing it. Now, Jason Todd says that's crap, but this is about what motivates Bruce Wayne, what's meaningful to him. His self-control made him who he is. His aversion to killing made him who he is. All these things, if he makes that decision, it goes into what motivated him in the first place. And so a year or two later, those two guys and I were on a panel with also Michael Wiesel, producer of the movies. And I gave the moderator that same question. Should Batman kill the Joker? And I wanted him to ask that. So the other guys gave the answers they'd given back when we did our panel in Canada. And then Michael gave his, and he did not think. He had different reasons why he didn't think Batman should do it. And I think we're a little broader. I think we're closer to you guys. It's like, if you do that, what does that do to you? What does that say to anybody? What kind of role model are you? It's like, how are you supposed to be the hero for people to look up to when people have done these things? Is I really wanted Michael there, so I had somebody who was agreeing with me that Batman shouldn't do it.
I think the part that
friends Batman producer sided with me.
Well, the other thing that I think it brings up, especially if Batman does it, is that a sign that he finally found a way that he wasn't able to, I hate to say de-escalate a situation, but find a non-lethal way to solve a problem. That is a huge component to all of this. If Joker is up against a beat cop and that beat cop has his gun pulled and the Joker does something that's unexpected and he gets shot, you know what? That's fine. That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's more along the lines of, we don't need vigilante execution. That's a huge line that shouldn't be crossed. But Batman, the whole point of it is, even when people have guns drawn, even when there are these elaborate schemes, all of these things, it's always trying to find and willing to put in the effort, the mental brain power and the restraint to find that alternative. That is one of the greatest parts of the character.
Back when the editor told them less than 2 years in, Batman should not kill anybody, Bill Finger said, you know what? He's right. Batman should always be capable enough to find another way. Sorry, Ben.
This discussion is the central question of The Dark Knight. Like, how do we topple the White Knight? How do we topple the symbol? And that's what Heath Ledger's Joker was all about, was toppling the symbol to break everything that Batman stood for. If you have one rule, that's the rule you're going to have to break. And I think that Batman does not break that rule is so vital. And when, we consider this question of, should someone kill the Joker? Like, I don't know why, in my head, I immediately interpreted, should Batman do it? Of course not. But I agree with Doc. If he encountered a situation where, a beat cop or SWAT or another mobster, and he draws and he's, actively doing Joker things and firing at them or, squirting poison or gas out of his little flower, either one, taking hostile action, and he gets taken out. I don't see that as a bad thing.
Okay, so now we both said, yes, somebody should kill the Joker. All right.
And that's why I phrased the question the way that I did. Should someone kill the Joker? I did not specify, should Batman kill the Joker? I said, should someone kill the Joker? Because I know Bruce is not going to be the one to do it.
#lawyered.
I am an attorney. So his rogues gallery then, we spoke about the dynamics with the Bat family and that interesting group of characters. His rogues gallery is also one of the most famous in all of comics. What does it say about Batman that he draws such an eclectic group of wide-ranging villains of both superpowered and non-superpowered individuals in an effort to try and bring him down? And I know this was mentioned in the movies. Alfred said, you started it and now they're trying to match you. I forget if that was Batman. I think that was The Dark Knight that Alfred said that in. But what does his rogues gallery say about him? Doc, Doc Issues, we'll start with you. I don't think you've answered a question first yet.
Yeah, because I'm very deferential when it comes to guests. That's just the way I am. But I will say, for most of the rogues gallery, you always have an interesting combination of personality and depending on the intellectualization that they're trying to use. It's you do have some of your base thugs. You got Killer Croc, who later on is shown to have a much deeper story. You usually though have people that are just trying to, as you kind of alluded to, be the one that got him. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, although for the most part they would love to eliminate Batman. It's more like, I found a way to either fool him, I found a way to master this ultimate foe. And when you look at it from that prism, then let's be honest, you come at the king, you best not miss. It's the idea, it's the pursuit, it's the process of all of this that could be such a large motivating factor. But for the most part, when you look at the origins of most of these characters, they didn't really want anything to do with Batman initially. It was just random circumstances and chance, which is what life is all about. As I said before, a combination of the genetic and birthing lottery as to what you get in life, with other circumstances that you may or may not have certain amounts of control. And then what do you do with those cards that you're dealt? And if you have someone of that ilk that's able to manipulate and have some influence in your own life and is going to continue to have it based on your own decisions, then they're going to start to adapt what it is that you're doing. So I think that's a part of it. I mean, obviously, let's be real. The reality is what's going to sell comic books, what's going to be good on movie screens, et cetera, et cetera. We know that. But I think from a psychological standpoint, the idea of you have someone here that we can't seem to crack and we are, and when I say collective we, I mean each individual person is making this decision in their own right. How am I going to solve this situation? And with some people, it's over intellectualization. With some people, it's trying to become close and infiltrating. With some people, it's just, brute force, whatever it is. But the fact that you have such a wide-ranging response to this one person that has pointed out that criminals are a suspicious and cowardly lot, says a lot about the fact that people are willing to take new and different approaches to the exact same problem every single day.
All right. Ben or Dr. Langley?
Oh, the competition breeds excellence. So I think the more that Batman succeeds at what he does, the more the villains who are setting up to compete with only Batman, but also with each other, is to be the one that finally, and the more ridiculous and creative that their attempts get, the more we're going to see people level up on each other just to see who can do it and what it takes to do it, and they play off each other. And I think the prospect of someone like Batman existing who is enigmatic, you never quite know when you're going to see it, breeds into some of the intermittent reinforcement. The word just left my brain, but some of the properties that exist in the human brain that makes intermittent reinforcement so addictive is that they know they'll encounter him at some point. They never quite know when, but it's an intermittent reinforcement pattern that keeps people gambling. If you got money out of a slot machine, every time you put money in it, you are never going to get up. You're going to keep putting money in it and you keep getting a jackpot. If you never quite know when you're going to get the prize, but you know that you might get one, you'll keep doing it until you have no more money. And I think the same kind of principles apply to the way the criminals think about it. If I keep trying to get Batman, eventually I might get him. And if I get him, I need to be something more of a symbol than he is. So I have to be more of a symbol of fear and destruction and counter than the symbol of the scary Batman. So I think it says a lot about the prospects of competition and the way that drives people.
Yeah, in terms of the competition, you see that repeatedly. You mentioned that they didn't originally start out. It was Batman that we're going to be focused on. And for the most part, that's true. Although in the comics, Bane and the earliest Riddler story, they specifically came to Gotham from somewhere else in order to challenge Batman. Their psychological need for that challenge had a very strong appeal to both of them. With the Riddler, it's more of an intellectual challenge, but both of them, they are very motivated by this need for that challenge. The villains overall reflect and distort aspects of Batman himself. It may be the Penguin, it's the Bruce Wayne. The Penguin so desires to be respected and more attractive and appealing and high society. With other characters, it's different aspects. Of course, Two-Face, it's like monster down one side and the Bruce Wayne type down the other. And then, of course, then the Joker, it's this complete distortion. The ultimate enemy for the grim, brooding hero who looks like a monster is this bright laughing monster that looks like a clown. Sometimes this was deliberate on the writer's part. Sometimes it's just they were throwing, spaghetti at a wall to see what would stay there. And it's like, nope, this villain didn't catch on. This one didn't really have an appeal. Okay, there's the guy with the sword. Who cares? But certain ones stayed and evolved because they made a more interesting story, because they reflected aspects of Batman's character, his personality. And in terms of going within the story, it's appealing to them for those reasons too.
Very well said. And that's sort of what I was trying to draw at when I asked the question is each villain focuses on a different part of Batman as a character. And some of the things that you were talking about specifically with Bane, we had seen previously Batman deal with hulking brutes, and we'd also seen him deal with cunning strategists. We'd never really seen him deal with one character that was both. And so Bane, I thought, was very much, if you'll pardon the pun, Batman on steroids. Ha ha ha. The idea that he's the physical specimen more so than Bruce, and also the cunning strategist. And so we did an episode on Bane and we talked about that. I like the idea of mentioning the characters that were drawn to Gotham specifically to challenge Batman. I'm almost akin to something like a Craven looking for Spider-Man, because that's the challenge. Like he wants to be able to take down the biggest one there is. And Batman rules the roost in Gotham. And so if to be the man, you got to beat the man. Woo! So what does it say that we've been conditioned to root for a trust fund baby to solve the world's problems?
Oh,
because
that's so loaded, man.
Well, I know it's a loaded question, but by the same token, I saw this meme going around recently. It was a picture of Uma Thurman and Schwarzenegger as Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze. And it was, she's an ecologist trying to save the world's plants. And he just wants to cure his dying wife's disease. And you're telling us we need to root for the billionaire. But it's the idea that after 80 years, we've still managed to be conditioned to root for this wealthy, hyper-privileged individual to be the one to solve at least the problems of Gotham, if not the world. I feel like that says something, that we've come to expect that it's Batman has the answers and that Batman is going to be the one to solve the problem. And that this notion of someone born of such literal class and socioeconomic and cultural privilege is the one to save us.
All right. I'm not gonna take too much time with this. I'm just gonna point out, I think the biggest thing is what you're trying to bring to the forefront is not at the forefront. In other words, At no point when you look at the story do you put Bruce Wayne's wealth or the Wayne family's wealth at the top of the list. You don't do that with his parents. You don't do that with his training. You don't do that with his studying. You don't do that with his motivation to take on villainy. You don't do that until you recognize, wow, I'm glad that this person was willing to use the resources they had to address these problems, as opposed to saying, this person has all of these things at his disposal. I wonder what his life is going to be like and what's he going to do. That's a complete, that really flips it around. And that's in my opinion, that just is a totally different paradigm. But I'm not going to get too far in a soapbox here, but I just wanted to point that out. At least I think that's the issue. Like that's why it's not nearly as much as a problem as it could be.
That you need resources. That's it. It's like either you inherited a lot or built up some business. Tony Stark, of course, he also inherited. Yeah, or you've got a sponsor. Somebody helping fund what you're doing. The new season of Batwoman is actually getting into that with their new Batwoman. She's not the trust fund baby that Kate was in season 1. She's a girl living in a van, but then who gets herself in position to draw upon the existing resources. It's story function for the most part, but then there is also that in the real world, we need some of those billionaires to do the altruistic thing, to do the right thing, in order to help others. Whether we're talking Congress or whatever, we need some people who are in positions that we've got a natural wariness of and reasons for, but we still need some of them to do the right thing. That also goes to the root of what appeals to us about Batman. When you're in that darkest part of town, it's when, you're in prison. Let's put you're unjustly put in prison. That's the equivalent to the darkest part of town. You're not going to be able to just take care of everything on your own. You really hope you have one of these brutes who is going to stand up for you and be your buddy. That's part of what appeals to us about Batman, whether it's the guy in the middle of the night or the billionaire.
Yeah, I think it's such a loaded question, but I think for me, what I find that endures about Bruce Wayne is that we don't root for him to solve society's problems. We root for him to solve his, I think, more than anything. And we want to see Bruce overcome his challenges so we can see the day when he realizes that he doesn't need Batman anymore. To get into like the sociological thing, I think, of course, we want to see, some economic justice in the world and to see a world where we don't have to have so much crime because people are fighting for each other over menial resources. And the only way that they see forward to get adequate resources or to get a taste of the things that we have forced down our throats through advertising that represent here, these are the things you need to be successful and to be considered valid in life. And you're never going to be able to afford them. So people go, well, not if I play by your rules. But we see Batman doing some of that, like, as we know, like the Wayne Foundation exists, and depending on which version of the story is being told, we see the Wayne Foundation does quite a bit for the city. The train is free, so people can get around and get to work. There's jobs created by the Waynes, and then there's the people who work within the Wayne enterprises that are all about the money and all about creating financial strength for themselves and their friends, and at the expense of people, and the constant conflict of when Bruce is in the boardroom and what he allows to happen versus what the money folks, the Howard characters are all about. I think it's like an interesting layer to it of, do we see Bruce Wayne do enough with his money that it justifies the existence of him also being there and using his resources to be that brute to go after the people that don't play by the rules in which the police can effectively deal with them. So we need this character to do it. It's a loaded concept that we see. But I think for me, the most important one, as I was considering this question, was like, I don't know, Anthony. I think I root more for Bruce to not need Batman than I do for Batman to solve the problem with the Joker.
Well, it was a sort of a tongue-in-cheek question, but I felt like there was enough potential meat there behind it that I thought it could spur an interesting discussion. But to follow that up then, to your point, the idea of Bruce no longer needing to be Batman, Why is it that when we got that in The Dark Knight Rises to start, it was so poorly received? Because the whole film starts off with, he's not Batman anymore. And he comes out of retirement and so on and so forth. And then the film ends with him in potentially, theoretically finding happiness with Selina. But why was that film so poorly received then, if that's what we're hoping for? Isn't that what we wanted? We wanted him to not need to be Batman anymore.
But it wasn't that a Batman wasn't needed. It's that he went off and moped for 8 years. And that was very un-Batman-like to a lot of us. And even aside from that, it's like, well, that's not what we want in his life. That's not heroic. That's not adventurous. That's dreary.
Yeah, just put yourself on the shelf for a while and okay, this is interesting. Let me jump back in. Yeah, that was actually my take on it, even before Dr. Langley said anything. And just because I don't want to shirk like the original part of that question with all the money involved and things like that. I think there has been underlying this for well before any of us were ever born, the idea that a certain amount of money or a certain amount of power is automatically considered a negative. And the idea that you can remove that part of the equation, remove that construct, is actually pretty empowering. The idea that it's neither automatically good or evil, that it's simply there. It's a tool. If you have it, then you're going to have a lot of opportunities to wield it one way or another. Be careful how you use it. If you don't have it, then let's be honest, there's going to need to be some lucky breaks, or there's going to need to be some incredible hustle or incredible random opportunity, but it still is possible to get some of it. So the idea that it's not just it's not an automatic life win one way or another. It's there. It's in existence. What do you do with it? How do you handle it? That's the bottom line with anyone, let alone Bruce or Batman or anything. And the fact that you check off the box and you say, okay, got it, use it. How do you use it? All right, let's make some stories about it.
And he hadn't just given up being Batman. He had kind of given up being Bruce Wayne. He wasn't out there. He wasn't active, interacting with people. He wasn't living a life. In that regard, it's like the beginning of Batman Returns, where Bruce is just sitting in the dark, waiting until the bat signal comes to life and he springs open. Selina kind of opens him up to having more relationships and connecting with other people, but he's like Batman 89. He starts off throwing a party. He's doing the Bruce Wayne act. He's not really living as Bruce Wayne early in that movie. But in The Dark Knight Rises, he's not really living as either one.
No, I just watched that one and I had the same reaction of like, wow, like he gave up on life. He's just isolating, and he's even like limiting his access to Alfred. He's still trying to do the altruistic things and hold the fundraisers, but he doesn't even participate in those. So I think where some of that might have been poorly received is we saw a logical conclusion to what happened in The Dark Knight was that the Batman had become the symbol he was supposed to be. Therefore he was interpreted as a villain by nearly everyone. But for that to have gone on for 8 years, I don't think is a narrative direction that I think any of us expected, or that it would cripple him so much, which is probably realistic that, no one appreciates him anymore. But seeing him so broken to only come out and then be broken again and come out of it, I think caused some problematic reactions from people, including myself. On watching it recently, I didn't have that before, but watching it recently, like Dr. Lang is talking about, seeing him so detached from everything and not continuing to fight through it, even despite all that, I think was unexpected and hard to watch.
Fair points all. Another sort of fun one. Why do people still live in Gotham? I mean, aside from Batman, you've got the Joker, you've got Mr. Freeze, you have supervillains out here making your life hell on any given day. Why not go someplace? I'm not saying move to like Bloodhaven or anything, but move somewhere, move to a small town.
Okay, so the irony of that question, in my opinion, is you just asked the question about billionaires and what they could do and why we would root for them and everything else. And then you point out, under the same circumstances, why would people in a situation where you already pointed out that they clearly are under some duress would not have the immediate ability to just change their entire environment, pick up and move everything. I mean, that's a huge issue, not just for Gotham City. You can name many areas of the planet, especially in urban environments, where that has been a long-standing concern, a long-standing question. And to say that we know the answer to that or have a quick fix for it would really be shortchanging it in every possible way. I am in no way a sociologist. I'm not an economist. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'll admit even then, I'm probably a mediocre one at that. Sorry to be self-deprecating, but my point is that you can't just automatically say that a person under a certain set of circumstances where they have definitely, but think about this, by definition, you are surviving, you are alive. Your family is alive, in theory. You have a job. You have certain level of stability where you know that at least for the very next day, you are going to continue to breathe. You are going to exist. You're going to have your basic needs met. To automatically then say, all right, just forget all of that and get rid of this one extra stimulus that is considered a negative stimulus that may or may not cause punishment at any random time and upend everything. That's not that simple to just throw that away and then restart somewhere else without any of the either social supports, family supports, financial supports, all those things, depending on what the means are for that person. So that's like my initial reaction to a question like that. Not to bring too much other stuff into it, but I'm even thinking, I'll be very selfish here. I'm thinking generations of my own family, depending on where they were. I still have family members in DC in certain environments, in certain neighborhoods where we've said, you've made enough money. You're near retired. Like, why are you there? And they say, because that's where I'm supposed to be. That's where I am. This is my identity. And that's how ingrained it is.
That you don't help the community that you grew up with by leaving them, which many people do, of course. Maybe you live in a town that gets hit by a lot of tornadoes. Well, you're still probably going to survive all the tornadoes. I mean, no matter what you get to, it's only a small percentage of people that get killed by those tornadoes. Okay, you live in a city where a certain percentage of the population gets, hundreds of people killed by supervillains. Well, it's a town of 9 million people. It probably won't be you. You at least get more interesting local news than most towns do. Some people live in a place where, we can't use the water because they're flushing the pipes. Maybe you live in Gotham where you can't use the water because the Joker has toxins in it today. These sound a little frivolous, but yeah, you're getting into the heart of what's in human nature. People live anywhere. There are some huge cities with terrible things going on. Yes, people have left Detroit over the years. People have left Flint, Michigan, but most are still there and are still hoping because they have family connections, they have job connections. Change is scary. You look across the list of all these list of you come up with points from 0 to 100, whatever. What's stressful in your life? Across that entire list, whether it's a job change, job loss, job gain, getting married, family member dies. Across the entire list, the theme is change. Change is scary.
Yep, change is an existential fear, and it is less concrete than knowing, Doc and Dr. Langley said, I will probably be okay if I stay here and keep doing the things I know that make sense to me, and that I know that if I keep doing these, my family will most likely survive. People will keep doing those things. People have stayed in war zones. People have stayed in gang zones. People have stayed in all sorts of disaster areas and situations because that is what's theirs. That is what they know. And that is where they have built a life that makes the most sense to them. And they're not going to leave willingly or readily. And
for your banking, only use the drive-through. Never go inside a bank in those places.
Right. As long as you stay out of the bank and, out of really rich people parties, you're probably okay.
So we got a question from Ruby. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. There's this wild theory that Bruce Wayne is really Superman and Clark Kent is really Batman. Thoughts? I have never heard of that theory.
What?
My brain just broke. It just leaked out of my ears and poured all over the floor.
What? I'm sorry. I know that's like my fourth time saying what, but I don't know what to say. What else to say?
Yeah, Ruby, I would love to discuss this more seriously, but it's just we're missing something from the foundation here. It's like when people say, "Oh, what if all of these stories, are really Bruce Wayne's and the mental asylum, and all the villains represent, things that he's dreaming of. Even though, it's like, okay, it's fiction. That one doesn't interest me as much, but I understand the question because I know the foundation of it. This one, I don't really have foundation for what you're asking about.
She says you get really weird theories on Pinterest. I didn't know Pinterest had anything other than how to decoupage a cat or something. I don't know. So the question that I was going to ask on a somewhat serious, or to get less tongue in cheeky, and I'll throw this out there to all of you as the last question. If it hasn't already been written, what is your ideal Batman story? Like what would it entail? 30-second synopsis. I'm not saying you have to go into specific details, but if it hasn't already been written, or if it has, then what's your ideal Batman story?
Okay, I'm gonna make this off the top of my head, but I'm gonna go because I think Rachel's my Batman villain, not named the Joker, that Batman takes control of the League of Shadows, and he goes through deceiving everyone, finally takes and wrests control for Ra's, and we get him out of the picture. And Batman uses the power of the League of Shadows to, rather than destroy the cities, take down all of these villains and eradicate their existence from the story. And that Batman, I'm going to use the therapist answer here. After that point,
I lost you a little bit there, Ben. You broke up. You said,
Sorry.
I'm going to give the therapist answer.
Oh, no.
And then you went sideways.
Oh, no, sideways. I said the most important thing I said all day. Bruce eliminates the villains using the power of the League of Shadows, then disbands them and goes to therapy so that he no longer feels responsible for his parents' death, and that therefore he can retire and be happy with whichever one of these beautiful women that he so chooses.
All right. That's an interesting idea. Dr. Langley.
All right. Well, I'm not going to give my whole story away because I still want to write it. But there's a part of it. There was a spell in the comics when the Riddler knew Batman's identity. And I thought they made very poor and very little use of that. It gets wrapped up. It's in the Hush storyline. Spoiler from not quite 20 years ago, but it's where Batman says, it's like, you're not going to give it away. What's the point? You're not going to give up this secret but there's so many other ways the Riddler could have messed with Batman with that knowledge. He could have put Batman through these challenges that if Batman fails this challenge, it might give something away. And I think there was just a wonderful number of stories that could have been played with that. It's like, it's easy to write a good Joker story. It's a great Joker story takes a different level of talent, but it's easy to write a good Joker story. That's part of why he was so popular for so many years. It's tough on the good Riddler story. It takes some thinking. There are many that have just been screwed up and failed. I think they really blew it on their chance to do some interesting things with Riddler during that spell when he knew Batman's identity.
Because the whole point is a riddle that everyone knows the answer to isn't enticing, which was the whole point why he said, you're never going to tell anybody who I am.
But it's just like, well, he's never going to kill Batman either, but he can make Batman stress over it, so he can put him in the challenge. Okay, you've got to do this, or they might find out this aspect about Batman. There are a lot of different ways to have played with it.
That would end better than they did with Arkham Knight, where they went, well, Batman's exposed, so he's going to blow himself up. What?
Or it could have caused trouble in Bruce Wayne's life because he knew this.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Doc, issues.
All right. So this kind of story has already been done with many other characters where you have so much financial means and you do therefore have an opportunity to have more political power. I would like to see that, like Bruce Wayne in be it, for example, privatizing the police and having that sort of scenario where you get the Batman feel of how society runs in the daylight as well as at night. And just exploring how that type of true ethics. Batman is a hardcore ethicist. And seeing that at every level, how that would really shape what's going on while still trying to make sure that he keeps, that Batman persona going. And I think burning the candle at both ends that way, I think that would be intriguing. I'm not even saying I know where the heck it would go, but just even just challenging it that way. Like, in other words, you work outside, you work kind of on the outskirts of the law. Why don't you actually become the law? What happens then? And from that standpoint, I mean, that's just an idea. I'm not a writer, okay? So I'm not pretending that I have anything to that. But if I see that in print, oh, you better believe I'm going to ask for a byline.
Well, I was going to say it's not all that dissimilar from my potential story that I would like to see. And this is something, maybe it's because my wife watches a lot of Arrow or has been binging a lot of Arrow lately. Mayor Bruce Wayne. They did it on Arrow with Oliver Queen.
They did.
And that show was basically, let's create Batman, but not actually call him Batman.
Pretty much.
Mayor Bruce Wayne. Now he has to do all of the legal above board things as mayor while also still potentially trying to be Batman. And how does that burning the candle at both ends impact him in that regard? So sort of similar to your take, Doc, just in a more political vein, because I'm the political junkie that I am. So all very, very interesting stories. And I would love to read all of them, particularly Dr. Langley. As you said, you haven't had a chance to write it yet. I hope you do get a chance to write. I hope DC gives you that opportunity to write either, a one-off or, a series, mini-series, Elseworlds, whatever. If they let you do it, I will definitely buy it, and I'll send you a copy for signature. So that's going to wrap it up with us. So upcoming episodes, we've got our Batman by the Fans episode. We asked all of you to send us your voice messages and your thoughts on Batman. Then we're going to be doing a film commentary on the 1989 Michael Keaton film. Full disclosure, we tried to get creators. We contacted numerous creators, numerous writers to try and get a creator interview to talk about their take on The Dark Knight. And unfortunately, nobody got back to us. So this is our fail-safe. And then to answer a question that Ben had asked in the group chat leading up to this episode, our last Batman-themed episode for the month of March is a full episode-length skit, a 1-hour Batman in therapy session. That is going to be something you are not going to want to miss. So that's going to be the last episode for our Batman month. So first off, Dr. Langley, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'll give you an opportunity here to sort of plug whatever it is you want to plug, social media, your books, your website, whatever. The floor is yours.
I am Dr. Travis Langley, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Henderson State University. That's my actual rank. That's not just me throwing on a colorful adjective. And the best known as, I showed it already, the author of Batman in Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, the best book on Batman ever written by me. But that also led to me doing a dozen other books as editor, lead writer, head nerd of the herd. It varies how much I read on the different books. The most recent one, and I wrote about 2/3 of this one, which essentially is the sequel to that one. The Joker Psychology, Evil Clowns, and the Women Who Love Them, which, like the Batman book, it also has a foreword by Michael Wiesel, the producer of the movies. Denny O'Neil contributed to both of those Batman books as an introduction to one book and an interview with him about Batman for the other. If you don't know Denny O'Neil, you don't know enough comic books at all. Here I am. I'm a psychology professor at a university in southern Arkansas, 4 hours north of Dallas, where they appreciate creative ways of teaching. And I get to do things like this. I get to write these books, work on these books, have conversations like this, actually be on panels at conventions. And it's a strange and wonderful life.
I was going to say, we are all the more blessed for having you here. Thank you again.
Well, thank you.
And then Ben, Popcorn Psychology.
So my name is Ben Stover. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor. I am residing here in Chicago. I'm the co-director of a small counseling agency here in Chicago, and I am also a counselor with a large police department. And the things that I am a part of is Popcorn Psychology. That is, you can find us on Facebook at Popcorn Psychology, and Instagram at Popcorn Psychology, anywhere you get podcasts. And we're also on Twitter at popcorn_psych. We examine movie characters as if they're clients in our office. It's a team of 3 therapists. Myself, Hannah comes from the marriage and family perspective, and Brittany comes from the child perspective, whereas I often cover the individual and the trauma-focused perspective of the characters. If you're into Batman and listening to this, our episodes on Batman Begins, also on The Dark Knight and Joker are all available anywhere you get podcasts. Would be very excited to hear what you guys think about them, and take this opportunity again to thank Dr. Langley, because if I hadn't discovered that book, I probably wouldn't have started our podcast. So I am very appreciative of you joining us today, and especially when you brought me up on stage at the Comic-Con to talk about supervillain psychology. Very exciting moment in my life, and I'm very happy to have you here and appreciate you.
Thank you, Ben.
So that's going to wrap it up. You can find all of our episodes on our website, capesonthecouch.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. As you said at the top of the show, our brand new patron, Devin, thank you so much. Patreon.com/capesonthecouch. You can subscribe and unlock additional content. We've got a TeePublic site as well. You can buy some merch. You can go to capesonthecouch.com/merch for that. So for Ben Stover, Dr. Travis Langley, thank you again both for taking the time to speak with us and sort of joining us in nerding out about all things Batman. And we'll have a link to both of your websites and a link to where you can buy the book, Batman and Psychology, in the show notes. So for Doc Issues, Dr. Langley, and Ben Stover, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.